a happy holiday of Hanukkah. The cognoscenti, those of you who are in the know that strictly speaking, the menorah is not called the menorah, it's the Hanukkah menorah or the Chanukiah, because the menorah in the temple had only 6 candelabra, and this one has 8. Well, 7, because the one in the temple also had one in the middle. But you can call it the menorah, and people who correct you are just being pedantic. So whatever. If you call it the menorah and somebody corrects you, you can say, stop that. That's what you can say. You can say, stop that. All right. The Torah portion, which always coincides with Hanukkah, I think always, is Joseph. Not that Vayeshev specifically always coincides, but the story of Joseph and Hanukkah always coincide, and therefore there is a long literature, which I will not inflict on you this morning, about how it is that Hanukkah and Joseph have similarities, what ties the two together. And I'll just mention 1 or 2 aspects of that. First of all, they're both about surviving outside the land, because obviously Joseph has to survive outside the land of Israel, and also the Hanukkah story is about surviving outside the land of Israel. And then, in addition to that, it also tells the story of course, how the Israelites got outside the land, since the way that they originally got to Egypt, from whence the story of the Exodus will come, is through Joseph. That being the case, we're not going to spend so much time on the Hanukkah question. I'll make a couple remarks about Hanukkah along the way. I want to look at the Torah portion itself, at least a little bit about it, and about the Joseph story. Now, if you'll recall, Joseph is a young man who is gifted and disliked. That is, he has dreams, and in his dreams, his brothers, and in the second dream, his brothers and his parents bow down to him. Their obeisance, their service to him, is then relayed by Joseph to his brothers, which is obviously taken amiss by them. What is interesting for this morning's story in particular is that the Torah says that the brothers hated him and the father took note of it. In other words, Jacob, is aware of the fact that Joseph's brothers hate Joseph. The Torah says that explicitly. And then this morning in Vayeshev, which is chapter 37 of the book of Genesis, look at verse 11. We're going to start with chapter 37, verse 11. And we're going to look at this initial episode for reasons that I hope will become clear and will flash upon you like a starburst of illumination, or not, one of the two. Look at verse 11. So his brothers were wrought up at him. That's the translation I have. It means they hated him. Or v'ikanuoto, they were jealous of him, they hated him, they whatever. V'aviv shamar et hadavar, and Jacob, you recognize that word shamor v'zachor. You shamor the Shabbat, you guard the Shabbat, you keep it in mind, you're aware of it. Jacob is aware that his children hate Joseph, his other child. And then the next verse is very perplexing. It says, one time when the brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing at Shechem, come, I'll send you to them. He answered, Hineni, I am ready. Now, why would Jacob send Joseph to check on his brothers if he knows the brothers hate him? So there are innumerable explanations. They range from Jacob had ill will towards the son that he loved at the same time, because love and hate are sometimes sides of the same coin. I remember years ago my brother telling me that they did a survey of long-term marriages, and in one of the respondents to one of the consistencies to the surveys that many of them had never, ever considered divorce. And one of the respondents wrote, "Divorce, never. Murder, frequently." And that idea that love and hate are part of the same package might be one explanation for why Jacob sends Joseph. Another explanation is that he thought maybe this was a chance for Joseph to show goodwill towards the brothers. I've come from the father. I just want to check up on you. I am serving as opposed to expecting service. The fact, of course, that Joseph then gets sold into slavery by his brothers and doesn't contact his father for many years, which is one of the enigmas of the story. All those years that he's the viceroy of Egypt, he never sends, the ancient equivalent of a telegram, which I guess was a stone. But by the way, for those of you who are young and don't know what telegrams are anymore, they were old forms of email, but on paper. Anyway, the fact that he never sends a message to his father saying, I'm in Egypt, I'm the viceroy, just want you to know I'm okay, might be because he remembers his father sending him to his brothers and resents it. It is possible. We don't know. There are a lot of significant silences in this story, and so there you have it. In any case, so we have here this tale of Joseph going off to his brothers and obviously Jacob being aware that the brothers hate him. So what happens next? What happens next is that Joseph can't find them. And that's really what I want to focus on to some extent this morning. If you look down at the text, he answers Hineni, I am ready, which, as you may know, is a standard response that lets you know that something significant is about to happen, right? When God comes to Abraham at the Akedah, he says, Hineni, I am here. So in the text, it says, and he said to him, go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring and bring me back word. So he sent them from the valley of Hebron. He sent them from Hebron, okay? When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. Now, this is verse 15. To'eh basadeh. In other words, he didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where his brothers were. I mean, think about this for a moment. In the ancient world, if you say your brothers are out there pasturing the sheep and they've left some time before, it is extremely difficult to know where they are. How would you know? And so the question is, how does Joseph find his way to his brothers? And that's what I want to focus on a little bit this morning. How does Joseph find his way, and what does it mean? So a man came upon him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, what are you looking for? Now, realize the probability, first of all, that someone is going to come upon Joseph and say to him, what are you looking for? And it gives you a clue that Joseph is looking lost, right? Because if somebody's walking steadily in a direction, you don't come up to them and say, what are you looking for? He's going around looking bewildered and lost. So Joseph says, he answered, I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing? Now realize how much is contained in that question. First of all, the guy has to know who Joseph's brothers are. And it doesn't say that it's somebody who's an acquaintance of Joseph's or is part of the Jewish circle in any sense or knows them. He just says, my brothers are pasturing, do you know where they are? And then after that, the man says, they have gone from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph followed his brothers and found them at Dothan. That's why this man in Jewish tradition is known as Ish Dothan, the man of Dothan, because even though he wasn't in Dothan, he was obviously around Shechem. He points Joseph to Dothan. Okay, lots of interesting stuff here. So who is this person without whom nothing in Jewish tradition that we know of, the story of Joseph, his brothers, the slavery, the being in the prison, the liberation, the going to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh, the brothers coming from famine, the feeding them, the slavery in Egypt, the exodus from Egypt. None of that would have happened if Joseph hadn't found his brothers. And so this is a hinge of history right here, this Ish Dotan. And we don't know who the guy is or what he's doing there. And he never gets a name. He just happens to be at the right place at the right time in the right way. Now, for those of you who are lovers of randomness and coincidence, you can just read this and say, I happened to run across somebody who knew where his brothers were. For those of you who like the phrase, which is a fun one and an interesting one, that coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous, you might think, no, this person was designed to be here. So what kind of people are designed to be at the place where something important needs to happen? If in fact God sent that person is a messenger of God. And some of you may know where I'm going. In Hebrew, a messenger of God is called a malach, which is also how you say angel. An angel, the literal meaning of an angel is messenger. That's why the Hebrew poet Malachi, who is a poet, not the Hebrew poet, the biblical poet Malachi, whose book is in the Tanakh, is called Malachi. He's a messenger. He's a messenger of God. But is this an angel? Rashi, the great medieval commentator, says yes. This is an angel sent by God at this moment to ensure that Joseph finds the way to the brothers so that the plan of history can be carried out the way God intends. Ibn Ezra, who is a contemporary, rough contemporary of Rashi's, a little bit later, says that he's an ovrei derech, he's a passerby, that's the pshat meaning. In other words, the simple meaning of the text. If you just read the story without the preconceptions that we bring to the Torah, says Ibn Ezra, then this is a passerby. So is it an angel or is it a person? Is it a coincidence or is it the kind of coincidence that God brings into being? Ramban, Nachmanides, not to be confused with Rambam, Maimonides. Nachmanides lived a little bit later, about 10 years old when Maimonides died, Nachmanides, but he was, along with Maimonides, probably the greatest Jewish scholar of the Middle Ages. I think it's fair to say that the two of them are the twin titans. Rambam in Jewish history, Maimonides. I'll give you a minute on Maimonides and Nachmanides. It's worth it, I hope. I've just read it and just finishing a book by Moshe Halbertal, the scholar on Nachmanides. A wonderful book. Takes a little concentration, but a wonderful book. Anyway, Maimonides was a rationalist. Nachmanides was a Kabbalist, even though he didn't share a lot of his Kabbalah. You have to sort of drag it out of the text. Maimonides was more a philosopher, Nachmanides more a commentator. So Nachmanides commented on the Torah, he commented on the Talmud. Now Maimonides did that too, but in the process of writing other sorts of works. Maimonides wrote on the Mishnah, but didn't write a serial commentary the way that Ramban Nachmanides does, for example. In the Torah, if you open what's called a Mikrot Gedolot, that is a Torah with lots of Jewish commentaries on the side, Rashi is always there, but even if there's only one commentary, it's Rashi. But if there are numerous ones, Ramban Nachmanides is always there. So anyway, this great figure, Rab Moshe ben Nachmanides, he says that you can combine the two. Remember, what I mean by combine the two is you can combine both Rashi and Ibn Ezra. Remember earlier, when Jacob has his dream of the angels are ascending and descending the ladder, which suggests that in some way they have their origin on earth, since they are ascending first, right? If they have their origin on earth, that means that there are earthly angels. If there are earthly angels, then it gives room for Nachmanides, for Ramban, to combine the comment of Ibn Ezra, that this is a person, and the comment of Rashi, that this is an angel, and say that some human beings function as angels. Now let's go back for a second to what we know about the appearance of angels in the Torah. James Kugel, who is a modern biblical scholar and a very learned and formidable biblical scholar and an important one, wrote in one of his books several years ago about the appearances of angels in the Torah. And he points out something that had never occurred to me, even though it's one of those things, you've seen it 1,000 times, but it didn't occur to me that it was so. Just like all the things that become so much part of the furniture of our lives that we overlook them. Kugel points out that when angels appear in the Torah, almost always, not quite always, but almost always, the people who see them don't go, oh my God, look at that unbelievable, that thing has wings, right? Or that thing is on fire. In other words, the ideas of angels that we see in other places, like the Seraphim, who are supposed to have wings, that's not how people react. When the visitors come to see Abraham, remember, who are supposed to be angels, he says, oh, let's run and get these people something to eat. When they go to Lot, to Sodom, he says, oh, let me give you hospitality, come into my house. But neither of them say this is clearly a creature of another world. So it is true that if you look, for example, in the story of Manoach, who is Samson's father, right, the father of Shimshon, in the book of Judges, that when he sees an angel, he's afraid, but it doesn't exactly say why he's afraid, but he understands that this is an angel. Nonetheless, the idea that sometimes people saw angels and didn't see them as anything exceptional or remarkable or mind-blowing suggests that a person and an angel could be the same, maybe in reality or at least in form. So this man of Dotan could be an angel or a person or both, or it could be a person who's functioning as an angel, as a malach. And that's what Ramban suggests. But we have one more step to go. The other step is what it is that the angel says to Joseph. Because the angel doesn't come to Joseph and say, you are looking for your brothers and they are there. They're in Dothan. No. He comes to Joseph and he asks a really significant question. If you look back at the verse, right? And again, we are on verse 15. At the very end of the verse, he says, Ma tevakesh, what are you looking for? Right? It comes from bakasha, the question for ask. The Hebrew question for ask or searching here is the same, right? What are you asking for? What are you searching for? So the Kotzker Rebbe, a much later commentator, right? The great 19th century Hasidic commentator, says this question teaches Joseph and should teach us that when you have confusion or perplexity or difficulty in your life, which is what Joseph has right now, right? Joseph is wandering around trying to figure out where to go. What you have to clarify first and foremost is, what are you looking for? That's what the angel has done for Joseph. And that's the most important thing that the angel has done for Joseph. Not so much that he said to him, oh, the direction is over there, but that he taught him this fundamental life truth, which is that you cannot find a direction if you don't have an aim and you don't have a goal. And so the Kotzker Rebbe sees this as a malach, a messenger who brings a double message, one spiritual and one, this worldly and directional. The spiritual message being, I am going to teach you that you need to know what to look for. And of course, the worldly message being, the guys who are over there. Joseph then obviously finds the brothers, and they cast him into the pit. But they cast him into the pit, remember, with the object, first of all, of killing him. That's their idea. And when they are talked out of it, or sort of talked out of it, or seemingly talked out of it by the eldest, by Reuben, they go back, and it turns out that or rather by Judah, I'm sorry, when they're talked out of it by Judah, it's Reuben who returns to the pit, Judah who talks them out of it. They see that it's empty because Joseph's has already been picked up by the Ishmaelites and Midianites. And that's the one other point I want to make. It says, looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. I'm reading from 25 now, coming from Gilad. Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain? Let's sell them to the Ishmaelites. His brothers agreed. And then it says in 28, when Midianite traders passed by, they pulled Joseph up out of the pit. So it says Midianites, but then Ishmaelites. And then when you go further on, it says in verse 36, the Midianites, meanwhile, sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, right? And then later on in chapter 39, it says, Pharaoh and his chief steward bought him there from the Ishmaelites who had bought him there. So it says the Ishmaelites were coming, the Midianites pulled him out, the Midianites sold him, and they bought him from the Ishmaelites. Again, attempts to unravel who bought and sold Joseph are legion and generally unsatisfying. There are only two ways that this works, at least in my reading, and I've read a bunch of different accounts. One is if Ishmaelites and Midianites are the same, and they're not the same. So that one doesn't really work. The most convincing answer to why there is this confusion about the Ishmaelites and the Midianites, and by the way, the answer that it was edited badly, if you believe that the Torah is a humanly written document, that doesn't work very well, because you'd have to be an idiot editor to say, Ishmaelites, Midianites, Ishmaelites, Midianites, Midianites, Ishmaelites, and not notice that that in the space of a chapter and a half, you've contradicted yourself 3 times, right? So in some way, this confusion has to be deliberate, seemingly has to be deliberate. And I remember several years ago, the biblical scholar Ed Greenstein wrote a piece about this, in which he said it makes sense that the confusion is deliberate, and it's deliberate because the idea is to say it doesn't matter how Joseph got there, God was going to get him there. And if you didn't get the point by the fact that this guy from Dotan just happened along, then get the point from the fact that the Ishmaelites and the Midianites and the Midianites and the Ishmaelites all got him to Egypt. In other words, this was part of a divine plan. And the fact that it seems like human happenstance and mix-up is a misreading of the deliberate confusion that is planted in the text, so that you will know that it was deliberately put there in order for us to understand the real meaning of the text. Okay, so that's the presentation. Are there any questions? Please write them in the chat, and I will give you just a moment. And if there are no questions, then I will just wrap it up with a few comments. But this is the time for questions or comments or alternate theories about Joseph. No? Okay, so then let me say a word about Hanukkah, and then we will. The one thing to remember about Hanukkah is that Hanukkah, or the adult thing to remember about Hanukkah, is that Hanukkah is not only a struggle against an external culture, but also a struggle inside Jewish culture. And we should remember that Jews have always struggled among themselves. It has never been easy. And that should give us at least some measure of hope. And as my friend Danny Gordas talks about in his column today in the Times of Israel, it's really true that Hanukkah also introduces to the world the battle for an idea, and that battle for an idea continues to our day and is important. And that's one of the reasons why we believe in light in the darkness. It's an ideal that we promote, and God willing, we will bring a little more light to the darkness this Hanukkah. And the vaccine is coming, and that's light to the darkness as well. I see there is a question about Joseph's forgiveness, but I'm going to leave that for later on in the story when Joseph does forgive. It's a great question. Keep tuning in to the Torah class, and we will try to answer it. But for now, thank you so much to everyone, and Chag Urim Sameach. I hope you have a very happy